Already. Oh, how cute. It tells you it's recording in English. Okay. Okay. Ready. Perfect. Whenever you're ready, we can start with the pandemic. What worries you, how we should be looking at things, and what have been the main mistakes and our main needs from now on. That's a very wide question. We saw this coming. We had been working to prepare for a pandemic, me personally, since 2005. So now we're having this response. It tells us how we are working at the global level and in countries in an uneven shape. Some are doing better than others. But neither the global coordination or the solidarity are working optimally yet, to put it softly. What nobody knows is if after this we're going to go towards a world with more cooperation or with less cooperation. And that's a question that would need some reflection at some point, but I don't know how to do that. What's happening specifically is that we are meeting a virus that is new. We had been planning for flu, and this is a coronavirus, which transmits differently, has more latency, allows us to do contact tracing, but like flu, it has people who carry the virus without being ill for some time. We don't know how important that is, but in that sense it's the same as what we knew about flu. So it's a complicated situation, difficult to manage, with a death rate that, as we had expected in a bad enough pandemic, it's not just the deaths from the virus but also the deaths from the disruption, and that's what makes us define it as a severe pandemic, and it has only started, I think, unless we're very wrong. So you think that there will be more waves after this one, or mutation or something like that? Is that what we should be expecting? Yes, I think we need to expect that this is going to be creating trouble for at least a year. We have more experience in the introduction of flu viruses, which is what happens when a virus from animals becomes human, and then it becomes something more stable. So with flu, we know that will take about 2 years. So if you do nothing special, the natural history, what happens if you don't do anything, in flu it has been normally 2 years, maybe with a few extra waves with more mortality later after that, but basically it goes from being a wild virus to being a domesticated virus, with many people who have immunity about 2 years later. With the coronavirus, we don't know, because it doesn't produce an immunity, probably, that will last for a long time, and it will be causing trouble for longer. We don't know that. That's part of the questions that we still don't know the answer to. Has it been done appropriately in different countries? And do you think that response is because of governments or because of social reaction? Where do you think the problems are? I think we have room for improvement. But the problem is that the room for improvement is measured in deaths, and that has two elements. One is how many people are dying, and the other element is how outraging it is that we could be doing better. And the fear of how are we going to do next in the next weeks and months. The problem is that we have to navigate, we have to do as if we were the pilots of an airplane, and then we meet two mountains. Not one mountain, but two. You have to get in between them. So you have to really find your way in between those. The two mountains are, on one side, what happens if we don't do anything. If we let the epidemic just do its own thing, if you let the tsunami attack you in full force. If you do that, you have lots of mortality derived from the virus, but also mortality derived from the acute insufficiency of the healthcare systems. We're used to chronic insufficiency, but this would be acute insufficiency, brutal one. The wave goes so high that it overwhelms the hospitals, and anything that goes from that capacity up is a mortality that you would like to have avoided. But not only that, but because the disease affects the healthcare people and their families, so the capacity for response is not just stable, it's reduced in the wave. So you find yourself facing an enemy that is worse, and it also makes you weaker. That's the recipe for pulling your hair out. That's one of the mountains. The other mountain is what happens if we stay at home for 2 years. No infection, but everybody dies from, boredom, depression, aggression within families, not doing exercise, the economy doesn't work, the vital services don't work because they start showing the effect of people not doing them. There are many problems in that mountain. So the trick is, how are we going to get in between those? And it's very difficult. We had never done that, and it's very complicated. Objectively difficult. Do you think we should move towards one of the mountains more than the other? It's difficult to judge the situation in Spain in just one way, because what we're seeing is differences in different communities within Spain. Just like in Spain, they are seeing a very hard wave in New York City, and that is going to be followed by waves in more rural areas, because this multiplies where it can multiply. So the first thing it does is it multiplies in cities, but then it goes in a more invisible wave in a more spread fashion in other places. So treating one country with 40-something million people with one recipe, that would be a mistake. So we have to fine-tune our assessment. And I don't know how these things are being done, because I'm not looking at the numbers with detail. My sense is that we're going to need strategies based on the level of disease in each place, and that we're going to fine-tune not just having two levels of opening society or shutting down, that normal life that we used to talk about, that seems to be gone, but we should define at least three levels. Normal life, that will happen after the pandemic, restrictions and being careful, and then full lockdown. And that's three levels, but we might need 4 or 5. We will have to think about that to see what strategies are better. If anybody wants to ask questions, I have another one. Those things that we're not doing well, are they because of what we're doing now, or what we're doing before? Are our worst failures in the past or in the present? Well, the failures in the past, they are gone, and we are paying the learning process. But now we have to take note of everything, because from this we need to learn, and there will be more waves, and we need to use all that knowledge. And the problems that we're doing now, we have to look at them with a magnifying glass. But I am much more worried about future failures. The things that we would be able to solve by doing things now, that worries me a lot. Because this situation is going to keep evolving. A pandemic doesn't happen in a vacuum. It happens in the context of a world. And in this world we have several features. Very globalized. Things go very fast. We don't have stocks. We're used to requesting something and having it in our place tomorrow. So having a stock in the past few decades has been seen as a sin. Why would you request things, order things beforehand, and then you have to pay for keeping them in a stock? Don't be silly. So in this situation, that happens to be a vulnerability. So, and also we have a very sophisticated society with huge interdependencies. So when we started looking at flu, interdependency was explained very easily. If you talk about a surgery, an operation theater in a hospital, if you have many people working together, and if the anesthetist cannot work, then you have to cancel the whole party. So, and that happens all over the place. If the probability of any of the people in the party failing is small, the probability of having to cancel the party is very small. But if the probability is 5% for each person, then the probability for the group is much bigger than 5%. And that's what might happen in the next months. I hope that it doesn't happen, and I hope that we have the capacity to react very swiftly and in an agile way. But if something fails because of things that we cannot control, then we might be in trouble. What kind of problems? Okay. Hi. Are you lot predicting how this is going to affect the global economy, or whether we are going to have bad cycles in the next years? Or is that not in the what you lot are planning? So I am not in any group. I am retired from this for good or bad. I am free agent here. My worry has always been severe pandemics, and a severe pandemic is defined by bad enough that indirect deaths are going to matter. A pandemic with less deaths, people die from that disease, and that's it. Not because of hospital collapse or lorry or truck drivers not bringing your supplies or things like that. So the definition of severe pandemic that ended up being adopted started from a simplistic setting, which was if it kills more than 1% of the people who are ill, and you know that they are ill, we consider it a severe pandemic. And that was good to begin with, but then the more refined definition from the WHO and all the experts was 15 years ago, was that severity actually depends also on the capacity of society to respond. So if your healthcare system doesn't respond well, you have a secondary death that is bigger than the one you could have had. That's equivalent to have twisting an ankle. It's not that the step is bad. It's that you had bad luck in how you stepped on it, and you have had more damage than you could have had. This pandemic, both because of the capacity of the virus to be aggressive and our capacity to respond, is working as a severe pandemic. So what happens when a pandemic is severe? you find that there are feedback loops that are positive, things that make themselves worse or make other things in the system worse. The typical example is the toilet paper. We have seen that. Somebody sees a shelf that is not as full as usual, and they are alarmed, and they take a few extra rolls just in case. And that increases the reaction of other people, and at the end of the day, a few hours later, you see empty shelves. Could that happen at the global level? I think it might. We are in a situation in which some of countries are taking a strategy of having more and more cooperation, having a world 2.0, and some would like to go to globalization 0.1. And some people are saying that we have to increase the capacity in each country to produce their own things. So some people are saying, next time, I think we're going to make our own masks, because I don't want to depend on other countries, international markets that could be temperamental, to put it that way. So both forces are going to happen at the same time. We're going to want to get on better with our neighbors and have more trade, but the motivation to stand on our own 2 feet is going to be very strong as well. Those two forces of separation and of integration are happening at the same time, and I don't know if that's going to break things. 2 simultaneous forces on the same object is going to be watch this space. So we not only have to react to that, we have to do things before that happens. That's why for several years we have been looking at this, and I started looking into the SCIM model to be able to make sure that we have the minimum for everyone. Simple critical infrastructure maps. And we can talk about that for as long as you like. Because if things become messy and we lose some secondary things, nobody's going to worry. But if we lose some primary things, we are going to suffer. Before talking about SCIM, you mentioned that there could be worse problems than we are facing now. And our job should be to predict that and to see what it is that we can do and not fall into those mistakes in the future. Could you specify on that? So, the things that can go wrong have to do with both mountains. One is do the healthcare but stuff badly and the vital services badly. So in healthcare, we could open society prematurely, not use all our resources to reduce contagions, and the permanent tension between recommendations and what people do. Ideally, we would want to have the best recommendations developed in the best way and mitigating mitigation, which is very important. That's the healthcare stuff, to save contagion, to reduce that. And then we have the other element of the vital services and supplies, and that's the territory that you explore with SCIM or some better tool if you have one. I wanted to ask, how can we find that middle path so that society will not ignore advice because they are tired and avoid a premature coming out? What is the middle ground for that? To have enough freedom so that we are not going out even if we're not allowed to. I think the solution needs dialogue and conversation, and that has to be done actively. And the conversations, as usual, are started by any one of the parties. or even by a third party, somebody who wants to invite to the same table. And you could have a role in that because you're very good at doing constructive debate. So maybe what we need is to put together those who take decisions in public health to those who suffer and participate in carrying them out. So, because there is always this. So the example with pandemic flu was that the government drops a rope. Yeah. So you have shut the schools. Now what do I do? The metaphor is if you have a cliff and the government is up there and they drop a rope towards the population, sometimes you find that the cliff is 100 meters and the rope is only 60. So what they are doing doesn't manage to solve the whole problem. So we need to work together. That needs conversation and design. We have to think about what the problems are. We need to listen to what the problems are. We need to listen to what difficulties people are finding on the ground. And some things are going to be very difficult to solve. But we need to be able to solve the bigger percentage of them. So in London, people are saying that people live in very small flats, even though it's quite a spread city compared to other places. But what they are thinking about is how can they open the parks so that people can go for a walk, so that everybody has enough minutes of exercise per day. And that means that we don't have to fight each other. We have to treat each other as friends and solve problems in advance and with creativity. Some ideas that had been put forward for a long time. So we had a kind of simulation online with this, which is when a wiki was created. It was called FluWiki, and it had a forum attached to it. That was after 2006. And that was many conversations going very, very productive. And then the news that I have, but I'm not sure if that's what happened, is that the computer person who ran both systems died without leaving the password. So the whole of the world has been left without that resource, which is a real pity. We didn't make copies of the system when it was running. I made copies of some of them, but that's a pity. So in that conversation with people who were imagining that the pandemic was happening real soon now, it was like war games. We were imagining a situation that wasn't really happening, but in our imagination it was. Many ideas came up that can be applied now. I compiled as many as I could in that booklet that I authored, that is in SCIM. It's resiliencemaps.org, and you can go from that to the document that I wrote. And in that document, I tried to create a structure to put all the ideas that came up in that kind of forum. Those ideas are available, so anybody can copy them and look at them. So if somebody wants to analyze that, the best way might be to have conversations between two people. So you're reading the same document between two friends, and you extract all the juice from the document. You would get more out of it than I would, because you have fresh eyes. So you look at what the ideas are and how many of them are applicable, and we could end up with a menu of options that we would be able to make being isolated at home more tolerable, and to be able to open up options to slow the curve more effectively. it would be a good idea if somebody were to squeeze that lemon to see how much juice it has. I wanted to make a question before SCIM. Yeah, in 2008, I was very young. You hadn't even been born. I had been born, but I wasn't conscious of this. People lived in spending lots, and after 2008, we thought that we would be able to go back to spending a lot, but we never came back to that. Is it possible that after the pandemic we will never go back to the same way of having social contact that could be excessive, and that we will treat each other differently after this? It depends on group immunity and vaccines. It could be that this virus is going to be affecting us for a long time, or that it will traumatize us so much that we will all do as people do in Japan and greet each other like this. And some people are saying that they are never going to hold hands or shake hands with people. That may be an exaggeration, but we don't know. So we need to look at shades of grey. With numbers. So right now, what we have had in many places is that if you look at the number of respiratory contacts less than 1.5 meters, so people who go to school, children, each child, somebody studied that, and it could be that you have 200 respiratory contacts per day. And that's buying many tickets in that lottery. We don't want to do that. Could it be that you can imagine the same in the underground, in the supermarkets, in shopping centers? So are we going to get away from cities? Are we going to look for smaller places, villages, with less contact, because we suddenly realize that we have been doing foolish things? If we have one respiratory pandemic after the other, I'm sure there will be a de-urbanization. But with one pandemic only, maybe not. But then we also have some other factors, like which is the combination of solar panels and communication satellites. So if Elon Musk manages to litter the sky with satellites, and you have lots of bandwidth even in the Sahara Desert, and you have solar panels there as well, you can extract what little humidity is in the air, and you can create an oasis in the Sahara. If you're in that situation, then we would leave the center of New York for a few people and we would go somewhere else. Could that happen slowly or quickly, or are we going to see a tendency and we will oscillate around a level of urbanization that will be a fraction of what it is today? We don't know that. So when people extrapolate and say, and they tell us that we're all going to be in 1 million or more city in 25 years, I don't think that's going to happen. In the middle, you're going to have a pandemic. Between now and then. So it's difficult to anticipate the future, but maybe progressive urbanization has reached its peak and we're going to go down a bit. But we don't know. And we could also have something flexible, like those cars that have a roof that you can put on and off. And we could have reversible urbanization. So we might find that we live in cities while we can, and when there is a crisis, we go to refugee camps on the outskirts or somewhere else. I have no clue. That looks like science fiction. I don't know if it's really fiction or what. That's what they did in China 1, 2, 3,000 years ago. They had this little houses, and they went to live near the rice fields when it was harvest time. And then the rest of the time they went to the village, and if there was an epidemic, they went to the little houses, recollection or not, harvesting or not. So maybe in the Canary Islands we should go and live in the hotels. Who knows? So any more questions before we go into SCIM? Or shall we go? If there are more questions, we can look at them later. So tell us, what is SCIM? How is it useful, and why was it designed? So the idea with SCIM is to have a compass for the jungle. Something simple that will allow us to orientate in a complicated situation. It's very, very harsh. It has a very high contrast, no shades of grey, just black and white. SCIM centers around survival. Survival of people and groups and organizations and nation states. So for individuals, it would be you're dead or you're not. So the first level is looking at individuals and looking at whether people are dying excessively or not. So how many are dying and what from? So that you can look at each of those causes of death and reduce them. So in a pandemic, what is increased directly is people who die from the new virus. But there are other catastrophes where people die from other things. So you could have really, really dangerous heat waves in places where it's already hot. And you could have more deaths because of that. In 2003, there was 35,000 extra deaths because of a heat wave. So we know that that happens. So SCIM has those 4 levels. One is individuals, then groups, and groups can also stop functioning, and that group is dead. All the participants are alive, but the group itself is not able to function, and the same with organizations and nation states. That panoramic view was created because we need to have the compass for the jungle. So there are complicated situations in which you need to look at reality so that you can look at what the vulnerabilities are, what things are failing, and how can you solve those things. All those elements allow you to navigate the crisis, solving important problems. Now, if there are secondary problems, somebody else will look at that. But the main goal is to cross the river with everybody in the village, every villager being able to cross the river. So what you analyze is 6 reasons of death: too hot, too cold, disease, helping with the others. Injury, now we need two more, hunger and thirst. That's it. So there are 4 levels, and those reasons can affect individuals or organizations. Okay, let's start at the beginning. The full model has people who die or don't die, groups that are operational or not, organizations are operational or not, and nation states are operational or not. So the first level is these individuals. That's the one that has 6 reasons to die, 6 ways to die. Too hot, too cold, no water, no food, this illness and injury. And injury means accidental injury. There is an earthquake and the house falls on you. Or intentional injury, that's war or violence. So if you have a situation in which nobody's dying from any of these 6 reasons, and you're still nervous, that's you being nervous, but it's not people dying. And that's about people dying. That same view is like a pizza with 6 sectors. One of each one of them is a reason to die, and then you have levels. You have concentric circles starting from the individual, which is at the center of the pizza. The easiest way to see this is too cold. So cold from the perspective of the individual. Sorry, we will cut that off later, or maybe not. So I don't know what happens here. Okay, trying to sort this out. Sorry. I am back. Okay. Never mind. Technical problems. So, the pizza has 6 sectors and the concentric circles from the person to the outside. So at the center we have the individual, and in too cold, I solve it adding more layers to my clothes. That's the individual level. Now the house level, I add insulation and I add heating. At the village level, we can cut trees so that we can burn them. At the region level, what we have is a way to distribute all that firewood, or places where you can get some gas for your heaters or something. And that takes us to the international level, where we can heat our home thanks to fossil fuels that are digged from the other end of the world. Those are the levels from individual to global. And that you can do that for each of the 6 ways to die. So food, you can grow it in your garden, or you can take it from the other end of the world. And the same happens with all the other systems. So that's one way to put in a map. And you can do that with a pizza, or you can do it with a spreadsheet. All the categories and all the levels, and then you have all these cells that tell you your food comes from near or comes from far, or maybe 20% from near and 80% from far. And that's your personal map. And that tells you how you stay alive. And when you do that map, you also see what might fail. So if all your food is local and the climate change and your harvest is 0, you're in trouble. If all your food is from a distance and there is problems in another place, or there is problems in transport, then you're also in trouble. So this map is neutral in terms of recommendation about how to globalize or how to do it. It gives you different types of situation, and you have to design your way forward. In the SCIM video, you also say that in a crisis or a catastrophe, what we should do before starting to work is to have this map and what our supplies look like, how many people use insulin, and how do we get that insulin, and how do we cooperate to get that done. So after developing that map, the proposal is that we should be self-sufficient to fulfill all our needs. Is that what we should usually do, or it depends on factors? So normally people tend to do what has worked for them. We react according to our instinct or what we have learned previously. So that's why we find things so funny. Like in the Canary Islands, when there is an international crisis, some people go to the supermarket and to the corner shop, and they buy, what is it that they buy? Sugar and olive oil. Why do you buy that? Oh, because my granddad bought that because there was a moment in the Canaries where we produced everything except that. So in the historical memory is that we have to buy those things. That is reacting in the present with lessons extracted from the past, and it's not very sensible. More sensible is to look at the present and make a map of what's going on now and apply the solutions that are relevant and useful now. The map has to be done for each place. The recommendation that we are making, and when I say we, it means Vinay Gupta, the designer of the system, Listless in Twitter, and myself personally, we're trying to suggest that the best way to learn to do this is to do the map for oneself. And if it feels dangerous, then do it for a neighbor, because you look at it in a more detached way. That way you also see that you can use this to help other people. You do the map, you look at the vulnerabilities, and you look ways to get out of those vulnerabilities. Those are very different ways. You could simply have some stock so that you will be able to face disruptions that are short in nature. And that is something that you do in islands that are far away. If you live in El Hierro in the Canary Islands, where the boat comes when it comes, you have your own herbs, and if you're a diabetic, you probably have more insulin than just in case the boat is late. That is very reasonable. Everybody does that with the extra fuel that we have in the car. We have a little bit extra just in case. It's not a silly behavior at all. So what we can do is, as a society, if we anticipate that in the next years we're going to have intermittent problems, then we should have more stock. Another way to deal with this is to produce more locally. And another one is to make friends, to have a more fluid contact with the outside world, so that you will have more guarantee that you will have your supplies. All of that comes from having a good map. All those strategies allow you to complement or supplement those, or if you have to increase one or two of them. The map doesn't tell you what to do. It allows you to make a plan. So what we have seen is how to make the map of the vital needs of the individuals. And then we go up to the level of the group, and the group has their own needs. To function as a group, you need to have your workplace, and that is important for some groups, not for others. We are seeing that with this pandemic. There are two jobs. One job in which you have to go there. You cannot bring a piece of the hospital to your home. And other jobs can be done from home. So if you're a journalist, you can work from home. You have a good connectivity, and that's it. What we're seeing is that aside from the differences between rich and poor men and women, we also have the social difference between people who can work from home and people who cannot. We didn't know that that division even existed, but now we do know. So groups, it could be families or teams or an ambulance team. They need to have a workplace. So in an ambulance, if that's not clear, you go wherever you need it. But if you have a workshop, a mechanic workshop, then you need your place. And in the case of the hospital is there and it stays and you go to it. So you need communications, transport, work space, and the control of your resources if you have an ambulance. But you don't have the keys to start the ambulance, then you're in trouble. So those are the 4 things that are needed for a group. So for a family, we need to talk to each other. Why does this happen? Oh. Sorry, I get things that get in the way. Never mind. Okay. So groups need those 4 elements. And the group takes care of the individuals. Because if you want somebody to bring the groceries to your home, you need someone to have a car. And that's the same for people who do surgery or the people who keep the lights on and the internet on. And then you get to the level of organization, and that's a group of groups. It's a business with many ambulances. And that business needs a map of reality to see what's going on, a plan to see how you react when things change, and then you need a way to bring new people in, and possibly to allow people to go away or to acknowledge that people are ill or something. And then you need something else that I don't remember right now. So if you make a map of your organization and you see that your map of reality is not working, you need to do it again. If you are the government of a region and you thought everything was solved and it isn't, then redo your map. I have a question about this. On the international level, if I am a country, I can improve my relationships with other countries. But if this is affecting everyone, so organizations have to be able to replace people. But what do you do when something like this happens that you cannot react because you don't have as many doctors as you need? That is the problem with pandemics, and in general the difficulty with crises that are widespread. If you have a local crisis, if you have an infection in your toe, but the rest of your body is okay, your body will take your toe to the doctor. If the whole body has an infection, you stay in bed. If you have a fire in one corner of the country, the rest of the firefighters can go and help you. If you have fires all over the place, each place is going to have to face the problem with their own resources. So we have to look at how systems work. So systems work as a response to needs. So when the system is not working because it's not enough, or when you have to change it, like when you have to shut schools and send students home, the needs that you are facing are still there. That's the definition of a need. A need is something that we want, but it doesn't matter if we don't want it. We still need it. Oxygen. You can stay without breathing for some time, but comes a time in which you cannot choose, and you have to breathe. All the needs that are in the SCIM model are needs. It's not that you want to have food, it's that if you don't have food, you die. So when you have a need, you respond to that by creating a system that fulfills your needs. If the system fails or it breaks down, you keep the pieces. And then you have to use everything that's around you to create a system that works. So if you need doctors, because the disease is more frequent than what you could face, then you will have to recruit last year students of medical students or doctors who have just retired. You will have to do that. You will have to train people who are close to that area so that they will be able to solve part of their work. Maybe with a short training that allows you to deal with simpler diseases. So you have to take the resources that you have and turn them into what you need. All of that needs a map, a very detailed map of reality, so that you will be able to make a plan that will allow you to do what you can. And if things are excessive, you die. So you can do what people did in Japan, which is to build huge walls against a tsunami of category 7, and then one comes that is 7.5 and it can floor you. So what Raúl was saying before is that nature has the last word. It trumps every other card that we might have, but we have to do what we can. It's interesting that how much you insist in having a map before having a plan, and taking that to the field of politics. Quite often we make a plan that is not related to reality, and that's why plans fail. So really, even if we want to make a plan, we need to do the map first. Otherwise it's not going to work, because if we have an old map, that's not going to work. And that is true the faster reality changes. So if you know that Madrid is on one side and Barcelona is on the other side, then that is not going to change. But some things do change. You were a shopping center and your existence was based on making money for the shareholders by selling blankets, and now there has been an earthquake, and now your mission is different. You need to help people, so you give blankets away. And the same thing that happens for a shopping center happens for the earthquake, tsunami, nuclear mess. Even the mafia became beneficent, and they also remember your face, but all the organizations had to change how they work, not only individually, but that's very important. They also, when you have a shared map, all the different agents can join around the new map. So if you find that you want people not to go to the supermarket, but you need to allow food to go from the distribution centers to the homes, you could create a system to have home delivery that's 100 times larger than normal. So if normally home delivery is 1% and you want to go to 100%, how do you do that? Okay, so you create a new organization that is very flexible, that is adapted to the new reality, and you give jobs to taxi drivers and to school buses. And all of a sudden, you increase your capacity to distribute boxes with food, which is 100 times bigger than what you had yesterday. That comes from looking at reality, seeing it very clearly, looking at what substitutions you can do, and join different agents to reach the shared goal. And just like that, there may be millions of ideas that will be very different in Siberia or in the Sahara. If we wanted to do that map, we would have great difficulties in knowing exactly where our food comes from, how many masks do we have in our region. Maybe a government has that information, but we don't. How do we face not knowing? So, first, SCIM is called SCIM because it's Simple Critical Infrastructure Maps, so it has the word simple. You do the simplest that will solve the bigger problems. And the other thing is that, and I didn't notice until very late, SCIM means that you can look at things superficially and so it's a panoramic scan. So in the SCIM model, you just look at death, which is a very brutal, simplifying view. But it gives you it serves as a proxy, because that death is related to disease, human suffering, and everything else. So what I think I would recommend is that you do a first pass, which is qualitative only. So in the Canary Islands, you know that some of the food is grown in the Canaries and some is grown outside. You don't know the percentages. You stop there. We will ask later. And if you cannot ask because you don't know how to reach that, then you agree with 10 friends to look at the tins that you have at home, and you see the origin of your food, and then you create the best approximation that you can get. That's what we do in epidemiological surveillance. If a diagnostic test is very expensive, you look at the symptoms and you do syndromic surveillance. You get the best approximation. If you're a government, you have more possibilities and you can get to data that the population doesn't have. So in the SCIM model, in my modest opinion, what we should do is to have that map and share it with the public. Ladies and gentlemen, this is our situation. It's complicated that they are going to do that, because in many places they are not going to do that. There are many motivations, some of them may be valid, that you don't want to share that map. But you can do it indirectly. You could say that in the Canary Islands, part of the food comes from outside, people are bored, let's have a television program about how to grow things at home. And all of a sudden, you go from being dependent 80% and then you go to 60%. And you know that in the worst case, you're not going to starve, you're going to just get thinner. This is I'm not saying that this is going to happen, but just as an example of what would be the way to reason around this subject. I'm not saying this is going to happen. In the Canaries, I did my own analysis of what is produced and what is consumed. I published it in my blog. I have the link in the description. So that analysis led me to think that depending on what time of the year it happens. If it happens when you have sold every banana, then you don't have bananas in the island. But if we look at the yearly production and consumption, we wouldn't die from starvation. We would die from boredom, because we would only eat potatoes and bananas. If anyone wants to make a question. The government should publish that. I have been told that you don't like copyrights and hoarding information and keeping it private. Why do you think that's so important, and how does it impact on all these subjects? Okay, so I think there may be motivations not to tell everything, not to give all the information, but if you can, then in general I believe it's better to share it, because there will be more eyes on the dish that you're cooking, more people looking to see that things are done correctly, and more people giving ideas, and more people giving solutions. So if we had a map in the Canaries of what the reality of our food supply is, maybe some people would be planting already without you having to tell them anything. You wouldn't have to wait for instructions to do things. You would, assuming that is a reasonable scenario. I don't really know. I am not a catastrophist. I don't predict catastrophes. I am catastrophologist. I would like to know that if you go to a cinema or to a shopping center, the fire exits need to have that word on top of the door. So if there is a problem, you will not get inside a cupboard when you're trying to find the way out. You have to signpost the way out. And that has to be visible for everybody. It doesn't really work if you keep it hidden. So lots of information has to be outside, out there. And we also need ideas, a database of ideas, how to turn what we have into what we need. The typical example is the plans on how to make a face mask. If we don't have enough face masks, but everybody has a t-shirt, and you can make a face mask from a t-shirt, then having that information in YouTube allows us to convert lots of t-shirts in lots of face masks. And people are having lots of doubts about face masks. But the problem is not face masks, yes or no. It's face masks how and when. The face mask has to be associated to a campaign, an educational campaign on how to use it well, just like you have a campaign on how to use your seatbelt and not to drink while you're driving. And surely we have to insist that using a face mask doesn't allow you to go to a rave party. We need to know how things work. That's one of the things that happened in FluWiki. Even people who didn't have experience in this area, who hadn't gone to school that day, because they are experts in something else. If things are explained clearly enough, everybody understands the basics. Once we have a shared map of how microbes work, then our actions are going to be sensible more frequently. And that's part of the distributed knowledge, that everybody knows the same. Everybody knows enough. So a month ago, we were wondering, we discovered, the world discovered that China had delayed telling its citizens that there was a virus going around. And that censorship, did it make any sense? I think that you think that we shouldn't censor that information. The information should be to the minute, in real time. Yes or no? Discuss. Okay, so my opinion is that it's better if information is out there. There will be a rationale for limiting certain kinds of knowledge, because fear is worse than information. You can look at that as a possibility, but I think in general, no. Now, what happens is that information has to be good quality. What is not good is to have rumors, bad quality information that is amplified, and things people don't understand. So the information has to, there is a hierarchy, which is people who study information. You have noise, data, information, knowledge, and wisdom. And sometimes we have information that we cannot really digest, or data that we cannot digest, that gives us a distorted view of reality. So the best thing is to have data with an explanation around it, because otherwise your interpretation of reality may be wrong. So for instance, if people start to think that the virus comes from China, so we should treat the Chinese people badly, that doesn't make any sense. Absolutely no sense. So the information can be misunderstood. So you have to add a layer of a good explanation to it. So to respond to a crisis, you need a plan, and for the plan you need a map. The map rests on the information that we have about reality. So we need to have good information. So the one important element is to see how we can know reality. I think we need more than information. We need the capacity to interpret that information, and we need the capacity to connect the information to action. So in public health, that's a motto: information for action. You're not interested in information for information's sake. The most relevant information is the one that takes you to taking the good decisions. So in the booklet that I wrote, what I understood about how to react to a severe flu pandemic, I had to include another tool together with a map, which is SCIM. So that tool is the OODA, OODA. So it's a learning cycle. The OODA loop, you can imagine that you're crossing the street. So it's observation, orientation, decision, action. And once you have acted, you go back to observing. So when you're crossing the street, they teach you that when you're little, they tell you to open your eyes and look to both sides. And then you learn to also do a calculation. Do I have time to cross? Is it raining and I have to adjust my speed? That is part of orientation. It's integrating all the context. And that allows you to look at decisions. And the decision could be, I will wait for that car to pass, or I'm going to run. And then you start acting, and you keep your eyes open, just in case another car comes. So we use that as part of this model. So sometimes we have to make decisions based on information that is not complete. And when that happens, and then you look at different scenarios, so what happens if things go better or worse than you're imagining? And you use the precautionary principle. At the beginning of the pandemic, you don't know how severe it is. When in doubt, you treat it as severe. And then we will have time to relax. And the other thing is that from our knowledge of epidemic situations is that stopping it at the beginning is easier than doing it later. So firemen tell us that they prefer small fires. If you wait until it's big, it's much more difficult to stop. And that's what we are finding, one country after another. Nobody learns from other people's experience, apparently. And now we jump on it and stop it when it's happening in our place. In the future, when we start opening our societies, we will have to pay lots of attention to small fires. Small fire, jump on it. I hope. I would like to see if there are more questions about pandemics or SCIM until we get into other questions. I think silence gives us the answer. I would like to ask you about the future, because I have somebody who tells me that for many years you have always been looking at the far future, like you knew about 3D printers sooner than everybody in the neighborhood. And I'm very curious what is going to happen that we should know about. Any idea that comes to your mind? Not a lot that we haven't spoken about. I think we're getting closer to a future. I don't know. This is a leap year, a very special one. February had 29 days, March had 500, and April is on the way to being 1,000 days long. So many things are happening every day. So the degree of information and innovation is really... I wake up at 4 o'clock and then in the morning, and then I cannot fall asleep again. It's just too much. So the situation is confusion. Many things happening in a short time, and lots of uncertainty. I think this is going to stabilize, and we're going to be in a world in which solar panels will have gone down in price. They will not be as cheap as newspaper paper, but almost. We will have lots of distributed energy, which is something that changes the political panorama a lot, the landscape. Because bits of energy, you can have it everywhere. Not huge amounts, but that and telecommunications are good things that are happening. And the information associated to energy, we will be able to have water and grow food locally and all that. 3D printers are doing great things. So we may be able to have recycled plastic to make local things progressively. Bad things that are happening, because we need to do the full PMI. Positive, bad, and interesting. So bad things that are happening are how much we're being spied on. Big companies and governments, or evil people around our database, they know the size of our socks and everything else. And that is a problem, because that may mean that you will have dictatorships that grab people by the neck and they don't let you go. That is bad. So something that is going on with the surveillance is to have apps in your phone that give your data of temperature and mobility to a central database. That is very dangerous, and some people are designing alternative apps that will keep your data in your phone without sharing it with a big business. So if you're ill, then you send a message to your contacts, but without sharing that information with Google or a dictatorial government. So the future has good things and also not very nice things. Climate change is going to be doing its thing. I think that's there. And then an interesting aspect is I don't lack compassion. Many people are working very hard. People are having severe disease and dying. We know that. But it could be that on the global level, as a species, this is going to teach us a lesson. So we might learn to be have more solidarity, more proactivity, and discover our capacity to work, to do things at once and land all the airplanes. And use all the deficiencies that we're finding in global governance to create systems that will allow us to face climate change. That is yet to be seen. We don't know how that's going to play out. It depends on what we do. And again, having a good map of reality helps. Any other question? I would like to ask you, what are you going to do with all this? But never mind. Keep asking. I cannot make my camera work, sorry. I'm intrigued by climate change. How are governments and organizations and businesses, how they are going to deal with this? Do you think things are going to change or not? Oh, let's see. Some people are secretly and not secretly wishing that this should last long enough so that we will learn. So if you have a heart attack, that doesn't kill you, but it tells you that you shouldn't smoke, then you live longer thanks to that heart attack, because it teaches you, if you learn. I think what we need to do is learn as much as possible so that we will be able to see how to go forward. When people talk about negation, about denial, there are two ways to do denial. One is to deny that there is a problem. And that is evaporating. With the climate change, we all see that there is a problem. And that is a real one. We cannot deny it. And then we have denial of our own power to do things. Oh, there's something happening, but I cannot do anything. And that's also a lie. And we can do something. What and how? I don't know, but we can do things. I think this may have changed our mind, because then we have noticed, when we decide to do it, we can land all the airplanes. Oh, you live outside the Canary Islands and you cannot visit your family. Oh, horror, shock and pain. But, if we can do those things, we can do other things. So with the SCIM mapping system, you realize that vital stuff is only a percentage of the population. The rest of the population could be planting trees or doing whatever needs to be done. It's a complex situation, and we will see. There's a question that comes as text because his microphone doesn't work. 2009, in many continents, there were economical problems. So could this pandemic stimulate revolutions? Or is that too far away from your area of expertise? Well, we can all have an opinion on this, and we can see that complex systems, you can have simple systems, complicated, complex, and wicked. Simple is noughts and crosses. A 5-year-old can learn how to play. Complicated, chess. Many rules, it's difficult to learn, but it's quite mechanical. Unless you're a genius, and then you use your intuition and you do things better than other people. But you can give it to a computer, so to speak. And then you have complex systems, family life. Depending on how you get out of bed, you have a good day or a bad day. Because it's very sensitive to small changes. And then you have wicked systems like the healthcare system. This situation is wicked. Many feedback loops that are positive that feed on themselves. So in a situation that's not too bad, and then all of a sudden it gets worse because there is failure that creates more failure and more and more and more and more. So when you have fire, fire generates fire. Political instability could create more political instability. If that situation happens, SCIM is even more valuable because it simplifies things. I don't care about the complexity of the situation. Let's keep everybody alive. Or are we not going to do that? It can be used for good. You can also use it for looking at the vulnerabilities of your rivals, but any tool can be used with bad intention. So could we have revolutions? Yes, it could. Because there are fracture lines that were already present. Inequity, conflict, and lack of unity, if you want to call it that. Lack of capacity of collaboration around common problems. And those problems multiplied by a pandemic can create situations where progressively they get worse. We have to be ready for that to happen. And I must apologize from my generation, because your generation is going to pay for that abundantly. So sorry. So intergenerational impact has always been there. Let's see what you're going to do to the next generation. So how damaging has been lack of coordination, and what is the tendency in the future for stocking up on healthcare resources and cooperation at the international level? Okay, I think we're going to see all that. We will have more stock because people are going to be really worried about it depending on everything working like a clock. and there will be some tendency to go back or go forwards, depending on how you look at it, to more level of autarky, of self-sufficiency, being able to produce your own things locally. We are going to see some of that. In parallel, we should also increase international cooperation. And that depends on mechanical and regulation and rules that we put on ourselves, but it also depends on our willingness to do it. And recognize that we are interdependent, that we're not like a teenager that decides to cook their own food. We live in a society. We go from being children who cry for milk, and then we go to being teenagers, and in which we say, I do what I want. I go first, and that's what we're seeing in some governments. We have to accept, from my point of view, it's acceptance of a reality. And the reality is that we are interdependent. And interdependency doesn't mean that I'm going to wait for other people to solve my problems. I'm going to solve everything I can solve. That's subsidiarity. Do what you can and stay connected. That's how we help each other best. If you stand on your feet, you will be able to help other people around you. You wanted to make us a question, so that it will not be just us squeezing your lemon. So how do you see things, and what are you going to do with all this? Do you have any plans to use SCIM yourselves? The way I see it, you're specialized in debates. Are you going to facilitate conversations at a social level? Debate is a tool, but we use it as an endogamic circuit without repercussion outside. But we think it's a good learning, a good tool that can be used in many other areas. We take all this as learning. So we will use all you're telling us with people who know about history or economics, and then make a milkshake with all of that. Because that way we learn more. We're not looking for a direct impact. To understand reality better and use it in many other aspects of our lives. Good luck to everyone. What would you recommend us to do personally with everything that's going on? How would we face this, and what are you doing? Am I going to buy lots of toilet paper or not? No, please, no. Don't buy toilet paper. There are many things that can be done. I have a little bit of a garden, so I am helping with what I can do. And because I have no knowledge, I cannot tell the difference between a potato and an onion. But if you tell me where to stick the spade, I can do that. So I am doing something in that direction. But basically, what I would invite you to do, those of you who want to do it, is to do two things. One is do your own SCIM map. And the other is to read the document that I wrote that is in Resilience Maps, maybe ignoring flu and because it's a different virus, but focusing on the aspects that you're interested in. The index of that document, which is 69 pages in English, the index is 2 pages. If you look at the index, you will see that there are some chapters that you might be interested in, and squeezing that lemon to get ideas that you can apply to the present situation or to future scenarios, that might be very interesting. And if you have a club or a network of people who are good at debating things, you can use that as questions. Should we plant more food or not? Should we do this or should we do the other? What is the optimal level of stocking of insulin? Or any other question that you may want to look at. So do read the document looking for action points. So if you do it as a group, you can tell me how that goes. That could be great. It's not my ideas that are in that booklet. It was a collection of things from FluWiki, from many people looking at many aspects of this. That's the value in that booklet. And maybe you will be able to extract more juice than I would have thought possible. Yeah, the document is in the description of this video. It's .org, resiliencemaps.org. Any more questions? Okay, 2 questions. How do you become a catastrophologist? Can I have a job with that? And could you tell us what is the worst catastrophe that you have thought of? Okay, good questions. So, the most interesting one for me, the catastrophe was to have a volcanic eruption that would be so severe that it would leave us, the whole planet, in the dark for several years. No photosynthesis, no plants. What are we going to eat? So some people have looked at people who work in Appropedia, the appropriate technology wiki. Those that they wrote a book on how to feed everyone no matter what. What they came up with was how to use felled logs to grow mushrooms that don't need light. That would give us enough proteins and calories and vitamins and everything else to feed an important fraction of humanity, even if we have to stay in the dark for a long time. And that took me by surprise. I didn't know that was even thinkable. But they have looked at the map of risks for humanity. And that very clever idea of growing mushrooms in the dark, that blew my mind. There is a book, a PDF, a World Forum or something like that. The link is in the description. Every year they tell us what are the global risks. Deep economical crisis, deep political crisis, deep ecological crisis, asteroids, eruptions, all of that. That's a big view where we want to see the ball coming at you from any direction. The thing with all these things is that each of those has a very low probability, but if you put them together, the probability is substantial. And then if you do that, then you go partying. This is not about being worried all the time. No. If you use your seatbelt, you can travel more often. because you're alive. And that's the whole point. Protecting life so that we will be able to live. All of us. What a philosopher moment I've just had. So the way to become a catastrophologist, in my case it was because I ran away from medicine. I did medicine. I didn't want to take responsibilities with a patient at 3 o'clock in the morning. I didn't feel capable of doing that. So I liked numbers and I got into public health. That was a safe corner and I was able to play guitar in the evenings. But then this pandemic planning thing came and I had to look at horrible scenarios and I had to use all my tools to look at that. What I didn't think is that it was actually going to happen, but this is what we have to deal with. I became a catastrophologist through that path, but I don't know if it's going to become a proper study field with formalized learning. But I know that some people are studying from the angle of civil protection and stuff like that. In the Canary Islands there is a professorship, people who do geography, and they have taken on that kind of approach. And so people are formalizing this field, how to respond to emergencies. And many of the approaches are about protecting the system. You need to protect the pipes and the wires. But SCIM is what if pipes and wires break? You keep your need and you have to solve your need from another angle. But they are complementary approaches. Last chance. I am very intrigued about what you are going to do with this, because talking is good, but acting? If we act, we will tell you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure. Very interesting, very useful. Okay, can we say goodbye? Stop recording. Bye everyone, we stay in touch.